Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I think there's still some people trickling in from the very lovely lunch that we just had. So as Brandon said, my name's Helen Goodland. I'm a principal at Scius Advisory, and we're a research and consulting firm based out in Vancouver, and we focus on supporting the construction industry in all sorts of different ways. I also serve on the BC Digital Construction Task Force, and we are overseeing the digitization of the BC Building Code and various other regulatory processes that are under the jurisdiction of the BC government related to the building industry. So we've got a great panel of experts here, as Brandon said, that really span views from both client side and sort of driving projects, and also from the technology side. Now, I'm not going to jump in and explain what they do. They're going to do that for themselves. So, and just because we like to be random, we're going to just start with my immediate neighbor to my left, and Richard's going to introduce Rescon, and then we'll go down the table here, and everybody will just sort of say a few words about who they are and what they do, and that'll sort of warm us up, and then we'll get into the meat of the conversation. So, Richard, tell us about Rescon. Tell us about you.
Yeah, no, well, I'd rather keep that secret.
Okay.
Rescon's a council of builders. It's basically an umbrella group, so there's a lot underneath that. We get involved with infrastructure, but we basically are involved with anything to do with building buildings on the residential side, both low-rise and high-rise. Most of the big players are members, well, all of them are members or affiliated with us in one way or another. So we've been quite engaged in advocacy on various levels to improve, amongst other things, improve the system. We're also very heavily involved in labor relations and things to do with health and safety and WSIB and stuff like that, technical standards, building code, green building. I'm sorry. And also, obviously, with respect to the housing crisis, so I'm on the government's, a couple of government advisory groups on that. One committee, anybody from the government here in the province? No? There you go. I call it the mushroom committee. They keep us in the dark, feed us shit, and do whatever they want to do anyways. But, but the other one was actually very good. That was on the planning process and so on. I was also the vice chairman of building reform in Ontario, but 20 years ago we addressed the building code system. I don't know if some of you might remember that. Maybe you're too young, but the one thing we didn't get into at the time, and we said it was a problem, was the planning system and planning approvals and everything else like that. And of course, as we know today, that is a big problem. So anyways, I'll leave it at that. That's what we do.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great sort of overview. And yes, it is a problem. Mark Anderson.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Anderson from LandLogic. We're a data platform that aggregates information from real estate, government, and all of the different bodies that would be involved in land development. I'm also on the board of a group called Hurontario, which Rescon has sponsored over the last few years. Going back to 2014, our CEO ran the research center at the University of Toronto called the Building Innovation Research Center, which Rescon also sponsored, and they were doing all kinds of interesting things with BIM and drones and laser scanning. And Rescon said to them, "Oh, that stuff's pretty cool, but what we really care about is how do we get through the development process faster." So that kind of started us down an avenue to do a lot of research into why the development approval process in Ontario specifically, but wider in Canada and really across North America is so problematic. So Ontario has been trying to address that both on the industry side as well as on the government side, and lots of lessons learned as we've kind of gone through that process. LandLogic now powers the Ontario platform, so there continues to be a relationship there, and we're excited kind of by the opportunities are there to solve some real problems in the pretty near future. So look forward to chatting today.
Abdulrahman.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abdulrahman Abu-Salhieh. I'm a civil engineer and a construction professional. I specialize in the large-scale transit projects delivery. I'm currently the deputy construction manager for the Hazel McAllion line, previously the Hurontario LRT in Mississauga. And I've also worked on the Eglinton LRT and the Mississauga BRT projects. Very passionate about the overall construction industry, specifically the transit industry. And as all of you know, we have a lot of projects currently under construction and many, many more to come in the next decade or so. And they're either in the procurement or the planning stages. So that's a little bit about me.
Great, thank you. Ashish, did you want to come and, yes,
Yeah, sure.
some show and tell?
Slides here. So very quickly, I'm just gonna walk through. So I am operations lead at Permitflow. This is a software-based solution, and basically what we do, and basically our value prop is we work with all the development companies, the housing companies, the pool companies, the commercial construction companies across the U.S. to overall streamline the permit process and bring a value to them where they can define and compress the permitting timeline. And this platform acts as a single source of truth. It's a dashboard mechanism. We have done over 25,000 permits across all states in the US. And and myself, I manage 2 different enterprise clients, one of the biggest pool companies in the US and one of the biggest builders in the US. So pretty excited. Would love to have a discussion with you guys on how we solve the problem for big companies in the US, cutting down the timeline, making the permitting more streamlined. Thanks.
That's great. So we've got views here from the full spectrum of construction, from housing to infrastructure. So it's going to be really interesting to see where, this conversation is going to go. But I get the sense that some of the challenges are pretty universal. So let's open with, let's get into a little bit more about why are permitting processes so problematic? What is the problem that we're trying to solve? What's going wrong? So I think, Richard, from your point of view, as looking at it from the sort of, a broad industry, you've obviously got a million stakeholders that are kind of, talking to you every day about all their issues. What are the problems? Like, why is this such a challenge?
Oh, this is fun.
Yes.
It's like the question, where are we going and why?
Yes.
Let's
start with where we are.
First year political philosophy. Don't ask me how I got into that class, but I did. But we've got some very big problems, and to solve problems, you need process is very important. You need data and info, and you need a vision. And we're lacking basically in all those areas severely. There really is no vision. I mean, a lot of people talk about a housing crisis and things like this, but there really is no concise, focused vision by government in Canada as to, like, what's living going to look like for the next, in 30 years? Like for my kids, for anybody else who's got kids in here, what are the communities going to look like? What's the healthcare going to be like, and this kind of thing. So that is severely lacking. And to the extent that there are visions, they're kind of haphazard, knee-jerk. Let's come out with something. Hey, we'll announce 35 million here, 140 units there, and things like this. And it's not coordinated. Plus, there is a housing crisis in the developed world to one degree or another. Some areas I've actually got it well under control. If you want to look at how to do housing right, go to the greater Tokyo area, for example, right? If you want to look at things similar to what we're dealing with here, go to greater Sydney, Australia, for example. And then there's, various different cities are at different levels of sophistication in terms of how they deal with things. I saw a presentation a decade ago in Hong Kong about how they develop new projects and new housing because they house basically the population of Toronto by the Hong Kong Housing Authority, and they were fully BIM enabled then. They were doing things that were, it was kind of like, I didn't know we could do that. I knew we could do that, but a lot of people here didn't know we could do that. So that kind of thing. So So we've got a real problem. We have not a housing crisis, we've got a growth management crisis. And a big part of that is we have, for example, 3 levels of government. They're not coordinated. Right now, if you look at Toronto, I'm not talking about BC, you got 3 different political flavors there. They don't play well together. And they're all waiting for the other one to do something, right? And there have been some things, bits and bytes happening, ADUs, they're talking a lot about modular, but they really don't know what they're talking about. And we have technocratic challenges, but the problem is there's a dearth of technocrats in the government that are actually well versed in these things. So for example, we had a meeting some time ago with a particular digital services group with a level of government, and they had a consultant there with a dozen of them. The 12 bureaucrats didn't have a clue, and the consultant didn't want to show them up too much, but he knew what we were talking about. Could have been a she too, by the way, it doesn't matter, or whatever. But so there is a huge opportunity before us. I'm just very concerned that we're not going to get our act together. There was a very good essay written by the Macdonald-Laurier Institute not long ago. It talked about the crisis of governance in Canada. So if you think about just about any major project that's being undertaken by government, pick your level of government, quite often they're completely screwed up, right? Think of the Presto card, what happened there. I mean, why we didn't just license something from another country that worked properly and quite well, more than, they've had them around for 2 decades. And, then we had that wonderful announcement, if you think about it, that, what was it, about 6 months ago, where they announced that you can now use your Visa card or MasterCard to pay for a transit ticket. It's like, holy shit, you're kidding me. Wow, that's progress. So, this sort of triumph of mediocrity that we're faced with. And now our industry, we have builders, members of ours are very big, very successful builders in the U.S. They're very efficient companies. They're very tech savvy. But they're not required to up their game here because systemically we're still so far behind. And we don't even know what's happening systemically. They don't know what housing is being, they could, if you go to any level of government today and ask them, what did we produce in the last month in terms of different forms of housing, different kinds of occupancies, they don't have a clue, right? And we've managed to somehow tax housing to death too. We tax housing, new housing, more than any other major city in Canada or the United States by a mile. Outside of Vancouver, I think Vancouver's about 50%.
We like to win on taxes in BC.
So anyways,
yes.
I'll just wrap up on saying we've got a long way to go on digitization. There's a world of opportunity there. We've been advocating for this for 10 years solid now, and there has been some progress. But, for example, the City of Toronto finally got them to, there's a long story behind that. Remember the research report we did with U of T Engineering on how long it takes to get things. We did a study on 172 tall buildings in Toronto between 2006 and 16 and showed that it was taking longer and longer to get things approved and so on and so forth. And we got the data because it was the graduate students from U of T that were able to get, the city wouldn't share it with us. And so Jennifer Keesmaat was the commissioner at the time. She went batshit crazy over the report, was terribly mad, and said, well, your numbers are all wrong. It's wrong data. And we said, well, they're actually your numbers. We got them from your office, right? So that was a little bit of a problem. Then she said, well, projects are more complex and they're bigger now, and that's why it takes longer. But, again, clever people, U of T engineering department, research people showed that there was no correlation between the delays and how complex their bigger project was. Fast forward today, Mayor Chow gets this, but there's a culture there that's a problem in the city. So they've hired 150 new planners. They've created a digital dashboard, which is good. So the second quarterly report just came out to show how, and it's limited, but it's good. It's really good, and I commend them for it, but how long it's taken to get things approved. So they've upped their staff completely, and guess what? The second quarterly report, it's taken even longer. And the reason for that is that we've got a slowdown happening now. Well, a crash, however we don't want to call it, but we have a slowdown happening right now. And what happens in the slowdown within a bureaucracy? They slow down too. So instead of getting 3 pages or 4 pages of comments on something, you're getting 20, right? So, but it's not getting better. So there needs to be that, literally, and we've used this many times, that Gordian knot cutting moment with respect to new housing, because we're losing people. We're losing some of our best and brightest people from Toronto. I mean, Toronto's fantastic, don't get me wrong, but we've got to get this right, because we're falling behind other jurisdictions, and we're not, more importantly, we're not housing people properly. And then you've had this insane, I don't even know how you describe federal immigration policy. There will be many reports done on this in the future about how they screwed that up so badly. But when you have an immigration minister not a year ago saying we're going to start aligning housing policies with immigration policies, and that was 6 months after they said we don't have anything to do with housing, you've got a problem.
So, yeah, okay, so fantastic, thank you.
By the way, I talk for a living. So.
Yeah, okay, so maybe I will butt in a little bit more forcefully.
Yeah, no,
then.
please. Yeah.
So I just want to pick up for Abdulrahman. You're on the infrastructure side, so I think Richard said a lot about what's been happening in the residential world. Just a few kind of major challenges that you've been facing with large infrastructure projects.
For sure. We definitely share the same challenges. They're a bit different sometimes, but there's definitely a lot of regulations and a lot of challenges that we continually face. And I think the two biggest ones that I've seen throughout my career is, one is when you build a large LRT line or a large transit line, usually it's one of the few only being done in a certain city or a certain region. So there's a lot of unfamiliarity from across all stakeholders, as you get these projects once a decade, a couple of times a decade. It's not very common. So that's one challenge. And then the other challenge is these projects are usually massive. They span tens of kilometers, and just naturally what you'll get is you're going to have going through into many different jurisdictions or permit issuing authorities. So you'll get the municipalities, you'll get the third-party infrastructures, you'll get pipelines, you'll get train lines, you'll get existing transit, you'll get highways, private owners, and right off the bat that creates this maze of what do we need to get started, who's going to give us this permit, how long is this process going to take, and that is and then factor in the fact of how the information flows from all the project stakeholders, how it currently flows, emails and Excel sheets, and you got all these different players, and the submissions they're not small submissions, they're large submissions, drawing, specification, reports, and how all that goes across. That's really poses a big challenge on the projects. And these projects are always under scrutiny because they have tight schedules, so that does not, we definitely need a more efficient way to exchange information to make this process more streamlined and efficient.
Right. So shifting to Mark and Ashish as solution providers to this, maybe Mark, I'll start with you, because you sort of, you're in the world of solution providing, but you've got your kind of connection into the One Ontario process as well, which I think is super interesting. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about what you're seeing from that vantage point, because you're looking at both, directly providing solutions through technology, but there's this sort of process optimization, which I think One Ontario is trying to tackle. Maybe give us a little bit of an overview of that, and then Ashish, over to you after.
Sure. So I think at the core of the problem is a data issue. So there's pockets of data all over the place, and it is a systematic problem, and it's not anyone's fault. It just sort of happened by virtue of the fact that nobody was really thinking about data 30 or 40 years. If you go back to the Mike Harris government in Ontario, there was a lot of pushing down from the province to the municipalities. So municipalities were told, go and solve your problems. And so there was sort of a lack of leadership when it came to data management that has sort of just kind of transcended as we've moved along and things have gotten more complex and there's a lot more data. Going back to Richard's description of the tall buildings analysis we did when we went to the City of Toronto to get that data, they said, bring your cube van because you're going to have to load up a lot of boxes. So the data exists out there, but the data is in boxes over here and in 30-year-old data systems over here, and everybody's involved in that. We have data, but there's no way to transact the data between all of the different players. So it really, I think, comes down to a data exchange problem. So going to Abdulrahman's comment about, there's all these players. There was one research project that was done, and I think there was 45 different agencies or ministries that were going to be involved in either approving or commenting on complex developments. So you multiply that email exchange issue times 45 different agencies, and stuff's just going to get lost or drag, or I don't know how clean your inbox is, but you multiply that across all these different bodies, and there's just not a data exchange mechanism. And municipalities have got their stuff, and they're putting e-permitting systems in, and they're doing a really good job with. Many of them are doing a really good job of sort of streamlining their own workflows, but as soon as it leaves the walls of the municipality and needs to go to Conservation Authority or MTO or whoever, it's email us the stuff or fax us the stuff. We did a project with the City of Waterloo at one point, and they had a nice e-permitting system in place, and they said, well, the problem here is we want to have a holistic process, but when it gets to Conservation Authority, we've given them access to our system and they won't use it. We thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't they use it? So we went and talked to the Grand River Conservation Authority, which is one of the more digitally advanced conservations in Ontario. And they said, well, the problem is we've got 17 municipalities that we deal with, and every one of them have a system. So we're not going to log into 17 different systems. It's just, with passwords and all that sort of stuff, it just become a logistical nightmare. So we tell them to either fax or email us the documentation. And that's the reality, again, across every municipality in Ontario. So I think from a solutions perspective, there needs to be some leadership at the top that has that jurisdictional control that can say, okay, we're going to put something into place here where everybody can exchange their data and their information in a more seamless way. And that's happening with Ravi Kalan in BC.
We are.
We've seen it when we've done international research of who's doing a good job here.
Yeah.
Singapore is leaps and bounds ahead of everybody. They're accepting BIM as part of their
IFC classes now. Yes.
Exactly. The UK in 2001 came up with a central development approval planning platform, and that's been operating for 20 some years now, and it's just a much better process, and it gives transparency into, if there are issues with Conservation Authority or with MTO or whoever. Right now it's just a lot of finger pointing. Well, it's those guys' fault, but nobody really has the data to be able to say, yeah, it is their fault, and therefore we should apply some resources to that to try and solve this smaller piece of the problem. So it really is going to take that top-down leadership to solve this thing that needs that wide jurisdictional approach. And I think there's starting to be some conversations within the provincial government, where there's a lot of different ministries, there's a lot of different bodies that are involved. So the getting everybody into a room to say this is a good idea is really, really hard. So that's a big part of what we've been trying to do with One Ontario.
Right.
But I think it's that data issue that's really at the heart of the problem.
So Ashish, give us some hope then. A little bit more about your solution and your experience in the States, I think, would be very helpful, because you were saying earlier that just before we started that there's some states in the US that have really done quite a good job of centralizing their regulatory processes more broadly. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say. So I'm going to talk about the solution side of it and how we are tackling this problem in the US. And it is across all the projects from commercial to ADUs to new house building, pools, and solar and all that. So how do we work as Permitflow? So we basically use software as a technology, and once the client or customer gives us a project, once we have a scope defined and we know what municipality that is, the essential part which Mark was talking about was data collection. We use AI and ML algorithm to make an AHJ database across the US. And the more and more projects we do, the bigger the database gets. So we have done 25,000 permits right now, almost, in fact, in all the states and a lot of jurisdictions. So the way we propose our system or solution is, the moment you give us a project and the scope of work, we use the database to create municipal templates. We exactly know if this is your project and this is the municipality, let's say St. John's in Florida, in Jacksonville, we exactly know what the documents, what the requirements are through our software. And we use that to our advantage to cut down the comment cycle, because every single time we do a project or a scope, we get the feedback from the municipality, we incorporate that further into the database. So what it does is it cuts down the municipal comment cycle, thereby it cuts down the overall permitting timeline. So you dump a project, give it to us, we own the whole process, everything in between, like 15 different websites, 15 different municipalities for a project, portal, login, everything, we have that system in place. And we keep doing it, and the result is we have almost 51% timeline compression on all the 25,000 projects we have done based to the previous timeline. 70% reduced involvement from the stakeholder, because we are saying we are owning the permit. All the other stakeholders like engineers, architects, every kind of engineers, they are in that platform. It's a single source of truth. You come there, check it where that is, and all you need to do is dump the project and get out of it. We just own the overall process. So yeah, that's the solution which is working for us. Nice. The complex ADUs in California, which are not easy ones, we are doing that. Solars are super fast. And if for the state perspective, I would say the states in Northeast are not the greatest because they are old in the whole process, whereas something like North Carolina, Texas, a bit of Florida, they are much more advanced. And I think the COVID has triggered a lot of the municipalities to go online, and that has really helped us the process. But if the municipality does not accept online system and they are, oh my God, you have to go in the office, we have a database of 15,000 local permit runners who we coordinate with to make sure our permits gets done in person, in office as well.
That's great.
So you've had success in the States, at least, in getting the permitting issuing authorities to log into Permitflow perhaps, or like have an account to access that information. Correct. So the customers do not have to go to portals anymore. Okay. They just come to us. Okay. We have the team members who are constantly updating the system and showing the progress in that. And on both sides, like on the your customer and the permitting issuing authority, municipality side as well. I don't. Is that happening in Canada as well, or is that not as? So before Permitflow, I did a lot of permits. I would say in Mississauga, Burlington, and Milton. So that's not happening right here, right now. But I think we are trying to have an outreach in Canadian market pretty soon. So we'll be excited to work here.
I was going to say, any questions? Yes, feel free, please.
So you're based in the States, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm based in Toronto, but my company is based out of Silicon Valley. Yeah.
So to say that it works over there, why haven't you applied locally in Canada?
So I mean, this company is, I would say, only 2.5 years old and just started post-COVID. So there are a lot of taxes challenges, but I think the focus now is by Q1 to Q2 of 2025. We'll be launching a Canadian division here.
You're basically the crux of, I guess, what you talked about is we're not really dealing with the problem at the source. You're creating a solution that creates at least a framework to work through that system.
Correct.
As it is, to be frank, leave it in its shambles and then just feed it the right data at the right time to compress it as much as feasibly possible.
Yes, and the beauty on the other side of the feedback is, let's say in Florida, 90% municipalities have become fully online, which really helps with the permit process. We gave the feedback to municipalities like Jacksonville Beach, Palmco City saying, why are you guys not online? And they have got the feedback, and through their whole process, they have become online too as well. So we are using the feedback on either sides to improve the permitting process as much as we can. So
It's a good question about, leaving it in a shambles and trying to use technology to sort of wring out what efficiency you can within that sort of flawed framework. So on our Minister Carlon's council in BC, what we've tried to do is really take a sort of, it's the people side of it. There's the people and the process as well as the technology that you have to solve for. So, having all the municipalities in the room together has been a really interesting process, because what they've been telling us is that the majority of their permitting decisions are subjective. They're not rules-based. They're not something you can sort of feed a yes and no answer into a machine and have something, come up with a quick answer. So they've got to go through what we had totally underestimated in terms of a massive process for their zoning bylaws, their development policies, their variances, and that's just municipal policies, to get them from being these subjective judgment calls that a person has to make into the world of a machine-based decision, rule set. So just doing that is a 5-year job. And we had completely underestimated the scale of that task. So that's just municipal policies. I'm also curious about the other regulations that we have to deal with. I mean, the thing that's holding us up in BC has been BC Hydro. And we can implement as many modern methods of construction, to use Mark Farmer's term from this morning. But at the end of the day, it's all for nothing if BC Hydro is going to take 2 years to do its load assessment and, figure out how to connect the project to, the rest of the grid. So I'm curious, you guys, other permit categories or types that you think really need to be addressed, but perhaps we haven't really given kind of due attention to, apart from municipal? Because I do feel like the e-permitting and the e-compliance piece is moving now, at least. I don't know, Richard, from your point of view, have you seen anything?
It is at a local level. In fact, I've I got a call from he was the chair of the Canadian Association of Building Officials, and we've worked with him in the past. Really, very innovative individual, and so on. And so he phoned to say, "Hey, can you go easy? Can you be a little more nuanced on your criticism of the process?" And he was right. So there's a lot of municipalities that are doing some innovative things to the extent that they can do that, but they operate within a broader system. So, for example, in Ontario, you've got, amongst other things, you got the Planning Act, you got the Municipal Act, and so on. And that's where, like, for example, Ontario got off to a really good start. I think there's been 5 laws passed in Ontario under the current government, with many innovative things of it. Some of it rolled back some of their previous measures, and there's been a couple of gong shows there, but they've kind of lost their way at this stage. And the measures that need to be, the streamlining that needs to be really introduced through, and they can do it through the Planning Act, they can do it through the Municipal Act. The Ontario government, the municipalities in Ontario, for example, are all creatures of the province. So if the province says, "Thou shalt do this," you will do that. And there are many things there that should be done, I would say, that haven't been done. Right. So it depends on where you look at it. The federal government has an important role to play through the CMHC, through, they do have financial power through infrastructure, things like that. We've got a separate infrastructure group that has done quite a bit of research on what needs to be done on the infrastructure end. But, that's still a very messy area, and I think a couple of issues were pointed out there were valid. And then we have other things like, I think it was a walking path or a bike path that they want to extend for 2 kilometers or something. I forget where it was, and it's $150 million. How do you get there? I mean, you look at the costs here. You look at, say, my favorite example, of course, the one I love to use because I've been through Asia and Europe too. was in the tunnels of Barcelona and the subway system, what they did there. And, you know, you go to Shanghai. So in a generation, Shanghai's built, I think, well, it's over 480 subway stations, and I think they're finishing off, but they got about 16 lines. That's the same time period it took the city of Ottawa to completely screw up a single LRT line from vision to trying to get it run. So when you look at that kind of, it's breathtaking how
Okay, so we need to go
pathetic
to
it
hope.
is.
Let's go to hope.
Okay, let's go to hope. So as I said before, there is there's huge opportunities here because, and here's the real thing. This is the good news. Even though, again, I can't believe how badly we've gotten
Hope.
it. Hope. We have the best piece of real estate on the planet. This is the best piece of real estate on the planet. Everybody wants to have a piece of it of one form or another. We just got to get it right. I've always said that, we're so rich. Canada is so unbelievably rich. We can afford really, really bad government. And that's what we have. And
How is it you can turn my hope into disaster?
so the question is, how do you affect these systemic changes? How do you affect change with respect to the governance crisis in Canada? How can we start, adopting and looking? I remember once when I first raised benchmarking, this is a long time ago, I've been around for a long time, in one major government agency, and I said, what are they doing in the rest of the world? And they said, why would we bother looking at that? See, because it has to do with not just transparency, but accountability. When was the last time some major figure in infrastructure or housing got sacked for incompetence or just not doing the job properly? It's never happened, right?
So
Think about that.
So
Fear is a motivator.
just in the interest of time, because we've only got
Yeah,
5 minutes
okay.
late, and I warned everybody this was going to go
I
by
know.
in a flash.
Yep.
So just to go down the line very quickly, I just want to hear about other points of hope, please. I want to end on a high point. Like, is technology going to save us? Let's maybe
So-
Ashish at the end.
Just on one
Maybe
quick
5
comment on
minutes.
that point. One quick comment. All the solutions exist. This is not a moonshot. We don't have to say, oh, how are we going to, we know exactly. I can tell you exactly how you fix this housing crisis.
Okay.
Exactly how to do it. And all the systems exist in other jurisdictions to one degree or another. We've got a world it's like a grove of fruit trees we can wander into and just pick it off, right? Well, we got to do it.
Okay, so thank you.
Sorry.
Ashish, is technology going to save us? And if so, what is that technology? Apart from Permitflow. So thinking 5 years from here, say, 2 years from here.
Yeah, I would say it's all about data. It's all about data. So, and that is where the game changing aspect is. Like Mark was talking about, like, let's say we don't know when is this permit getting approved. If you have enough data for a house built in a municipality, Minnesota, I can challenge the municipality saying, well, based on all my 15 projects we did before, we had X number of days, we took it. Why is it not happening? Based on the municipal comments they have, we are collecting the data in our company, which can be done anywhere else, that if this kind of project is there, these kind of comments will occur, which we have solution for that already. If you're asking something similar, now that becomes subjective because it's not rule-based. So we start challenging the municipalities, which we are doing right now, because when the reviewers change, and it always changes in a growing city like Austin or Houston, we start questioning and challenging them that why are you asking these questions when it is not defined in the code and you need it anyways. So I would say the data where you can do an accurate prediction for a project based on the projects you have done and the requirements in terms of documents and design guidelines, we can use that to challenge the AHJs themselves and make them more accountable.
Great. Thank you. That's really great. So, Mark, maybe your comments, and then Abdulrahman, you are going to close this off with views from the user of all of these systems and what you're going to be doing. So maybe, Mark, you can go first. A couple of thoughts from you.
It's unfortunate that it's taken the current crisis to make a lot of these conversations happening, but they are happening now. And I think people are aware that there's a huge data problem and a huge data exchange problem. So I think in the very near future, there's going to be solutions come forward from a technology perspective to aggregate, to structure, and to have a single database source of truth from which all the government entities can pull and have that transparency. And I think we're on. It's going to happen soon. And just as an FYI, we're meeting with MPBSD Thursday, and they're in charge of data standards in the province of Ontario. They know there's an issue and they want to make changes. So those conversations are happening, and I think it's going to happen. We just don't need to have any government changes in the meantime that put things back a few years.
It's going to be an election.
So good. There's a great, strong source of hope. Thank you for that. Abdulrahman, you are the practitioner in our group here. You've got to deal with all of this. What's your cause for hope over the next little while, if you have such thing?
I think the outlook is positive. It's going to take some time. Permitflow and other companies that I've seen here in this exhibition, there's new technologies emerging. I'll use one example. I'm not that old, but for example, stuff as something as simple as viewing drawings on a construction site. I remember when all these softwares were coming up, and maybe 5% of the people were using them. No, let's stick to the old way. It's better. It's cleaner. It's more. You can depend on it more. And now today, you see it being used almost exclusively on the construction site. You still get the people that stick to the old systems. So I think it's just a matter of time. And there's a lot of technologies out there in permitting and the other aspects of the overall development of a project. So I believe the outlook is positive, and we should be seeing some changes in the near future.
So we need to get rid of all the old guys.
I'm the problem. Hey, I used to be a government guy a long time ago.
All right, so we're at 1:45 already, so thank you, guys. That was a very spirited conversation. Really appreciated it. I'm sure you wouldn't mind sticking around for a couple of minutes afterwards if anyone has any more questions to pick up after we finish. But Brandon, I know we've got a schedule to keep, so over to you. Thank you.